Welcome to the Dream Plan Start Grow Show, where the goal is to provide you tips and tools to create and execute your business plan for success. Welcome back to the Dream Plan Start Grow Show. My name is Allison Turner. I started these interviews because I really love entrepreneurship and I love hearing other stories of how people got started in their business. And I truly believe we can learn from one another. So whether you are new to business or you're thinking about starting a business, or even if you're a seasoned business owner, check out all of my interviews on my YouTube channel at Dream Plan Start Grow or on my podcast at Dream Plan Start Grow. Today, I'm honored to have with me Troy Rand. He's the owner of South Florida Fitness. He's an ultra athlete, which really means, for those of you who don't know, he puts himself through hell to achieve long distances. So it's one of those crazy people, in my opinion. But he's completed one Ironman and I don't know, one or two half Ironman. I guess that's a plural. He has a PhD in exercise science with an emphasis in biomechanics. And Troy's true love is sharing his passion for health and fitness, and to help make a difference in the lives of people he gets to work with. So welcome, Troy. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I know some of your stories. So Troy and I are in Toastmasters together, and he's the current president of the club I'm in Boynton Beach, Florida. So I know some of your story kind of through your speeches and whatnot, but what really prompted you to get into, I guess, the exercise world in the first place and then ultimately start a business? I mean, I know it's an interesting story.
Yeah, I first got into exercise. Well, I was always an active child, playing different sports, skateboarding, different things like that. But I didn't really get into exercise until I was about 19 or 20 years old. And then I really started deciding to lift weights and run and build up my endurance. And I was really poor at the time. So I wanted to hire a personal trainer because I would read the magazines and one month they would say one thing, the next month they would say something completely different. And I'm like, it's the same magazine. You're contradicting yourself. I don't know what to believe. And I couldn't afford a personal trainer because I was poor, like I said. And I saw this ad for the community college that said, become a personal trainer. And I'm living in California at the time. And back then, community colleges were like $11 a credit hour. And I decided I can afford to do this. I can go become a personal trainer since I can't afford one. That's how I got into like the educational side of health and fitness, into exploring, learning about it more. So I went to school and discovered biomechanics and exercise science in general. And at first I was blown away. I was like, this is actually science. Like, it's not just, counting reps and telling people what to do, but there's actually a science to this. And so that was how I got into exercise science in the first place. And then it was actually quite a while before I ended up pursuing that, because I didn't go back to college till I was 30 years old. So it took me a while to fully pursue it, but that was my first exposure to fitness and exercise science in general.
Okay, so when you got the personal trainer certification, did you just use it for yourself? Is that the main thing, or did you start training other clients at that point?
Yeah, so when I first went to school when I was 20, I had my internship set up and everything for the summer as a 1-year-long program. The last semester, I moved 3 times during the semester and couldn't keep up with the schooling. So I actually dropped out of that program and then just went on with life for the next 10 years before I went back to school.
Okay.
And then when I went back to school, I originally was thinking I was going to go for business or something. And I took a human biology class just as a general, credit class. And right then and there, I knew I was going to go on for biomechanics.
But I think that's interesting because, I've always had an interest in athletics. I grew up playing tennis,
right,
and I taught tennis for about 14 years. And then I had a personal trainer in my 30s because I started seeing, like women see changes in their body and whatnot. So I started seeing some of that in my early 30s, and I was like, what is this going on? And so I hired a personal trainer. I didn't know the first thing about, and I just happened to hire like a really good one that was into this, what you're talking about, like the science and the biomechanics and the rest period time. And he had this whole science behind it, which fascinated me because I would watch other trainers in the same gym, and I see one of these people still today, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think there's any science behind what he's doing. Like,
Right.
because half the time he's on, he's looking at his phone, like he just points at the machine and sets the weight, and then he's looking at his phone while the client's doing the work. Versus my trainer was like looking at the mechanics and like making sure all the movement was right and slowing down and like the reps and all the different things. And so that got me interested in that side of things as well. And I actually did go back and get at the time, my personal trainer certification through the NSCA. And then I was teaching tennis still. And then I got my strength and conditioning certification as well through the NSCA. And I've never kept them up because I never continued to do the CEUs to keep them up.
I'm in the phase of knocking out all my CEUs for my strength and conditioning right now.
Yeah.
Because I have the end of the year as recertification.
Yep. So I just never did it. I contemplated switching from tennis because I was teaching tennis over to that field, being a personal trainer. And I interviewed a couple of places and realized very quickly that the money between tennis, and I was in a private country club in tennis, and personal training was vastly different. So, and I did personal train a couple of times in my country club because I had talked to them and I said, I have tennis clients that might want to personal train with me. And so I did do that a couple of times. But it's, started having conflicts with the tennis, which was obviously my main thing that I needed to focus on. And the other clubs, when I would go outside of the country club scene, wanted to pay me. I was like, no. Maybe not. But for me, it was good just because I love to learn and I like to learn kind of the science behind things. And so for me, it wasn't wasted money or wasted time because I got my own personal gratification out of it, even though I never used it to earn money per se. But what prompted you then? You said 10 years later, you went back to school. So obviously something in your life prompted you to all of a sudden kind of rekindle that fire of going back to school and learning more.
Yeah, it was a factory job. I worked in a factory for 4 years. After 2 years of that, I realized that I didn't want to be in a factory the rest of my life. And I was seeing the way the job worked was you would come in and they called it qualifying you at your job, meaning you knew what you were doing. Once you were qualified at your job, which took me about 2 weeks, you made full pay. So I come in and 2 weeks later, I'm making as much money as this 65-year-old guy who's been working here since he was 20. And I knew that I did not want to be there when I was in my 60s and have some new kid come in making as much as me in a couple of weeks. And it just really, besides the fact I'm in a factory and it was also like a hog processing plant, so it wasn't the nicest of factories.
Yeah.
I just knew I had to get out of there. And so, like I said, when I first went back to school, I was thinking business or something because I didn't really have a clear direction. I just knew I needed to get an education, and that was what I wanted to do. I've always loved learning. Like you said with the personal training thing, if nothing else, you learned from it, and that was great. And that's how I am in life in general, is I love to learn. So I could be a full-time college student the rest of my life and I'll be perfectly happy. Unfortunately, that student loan bill would just keep going up higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, you and me both, because I'm like, I could just go back and get my PhD, but then I'm like, what would I do? I mean, I know you have your PhD, but I'm like, what would I do with my PhD if I got it? I mean, and I mean, even if I got it in business or history or whatever, but So you went back to school. And then you continued, obviously, from the time you entered all the way through the PhD, correct?
Yeah, I went back. I was 30 when I went back to college, and I went 11 years straight through. I did my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD all in one shot. I took one semester off, and that was when I switched from the community college over to the university. It was also the semester I got married. So I was going from the community college, I got married, went on my honeymoon, and then started back to the university. But besides that, I went every summer for summer school, never took a break except for that one semester.
Wow. It's a lot of school all at once. I mean, although you did have a break
Yeah.
between, I guess, high school and then, but
Yeah, I had a long break.
So
And that's what a lot of people take, that break after their bachelor's degree before they go back to grad school. And because I didn't go back till I was 30, I had my life experience. I didn't need to go out and learn about the world and stuff. I had all that taken care of. So I knew I just needed to go straight through.
right, yeah. Because if you don't, you may not go back again.
Right, exactly.
So,
Yep.
I completely understand. I mean, it's interesting what you said about, you were in the factory for 4 years and that you knew you had to get out of the factory, that you didn't want to be doing that, in your 60s. And I kind of got that when I was teaching tennis, and I liked what I did and I enjoyed what I did. But ultimately, I would always get bored in jobs because I was like, okay, like it's the same thing, different day type of thing,
Right.
And I always had, when I was tennis, and tennis was the longest stint of any job besides this company, that I've had, I always had to teach it and be an administrator of it. So my last job, which was at a country club here in South Florida, I was like the junior director plus teaching, had my own privates and groups and classes and things like that. And in Chicago, before I moved down here, same concept. I was the adult director, and then I also taught the sport. But I always had to have kind of that combination because one gave me one thing and then one gave me something else. And it always gave me a different, a little bit more of a challenge versus just teaching or just administrating or, things like that. And I think that's one of the things I credit with, going out into the entrepreneur world, and I never saw myself doing that at all. I mean, I started this company with a business partner, and I don't know that I would have started this type of company at the time had I not had that business partner who had owned a business before. So she was vital in, making this happen. But I think that fact that I would get bored in jobs, and I don't know, people that are earlier than our generation came out of college or whatever and like worked the same job for 30 or 40 years, and you're like, how do they do that? Like, did they settle, or is it just a thing to do because you were supporting your family and you had to have the steady job? And I mean, obviously they got a better retirement package and pension and all that than most companies provide now. So there was some benefit to it from that standpoint, but it's interesting that, the mindset of an entrepreneur to me is much different because you always are looking for something new and different, and each day is different, even when you're running your own company, even though you have similar aspects because you're still doing your same service per se, but you're also running the company looking for the next goal, looking for maybe the next service you're going to provide or product you're going to create, things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right with the generation before us. It was easier in the sense that, the man could go work one job, support the wife and kids, and you could have the good retirement. And so I think people, I'm sure they felt the same way. They probably got bored, but they probably maintained that because of the alternative, where I think now it maybe is a blessing that we don't have that stability in the workforce because it maybe makes it a little easier to shy away from that and to go out on our own and do things that hopefully in the long run will be better.
Right. And I think ultimately the world will get a bigger impact out of the small businesses. And I'm not saying
very much so.
Nothing negative against the big businesses, because obviously they help as well, but there's more small businesses in the world than there are these large corporations. And I think those are the ones that can really touch people more personally, I guess, than some of these large corporations, like a Coca-Cola, which is certainly great at putting all their different products out, but it's not like a personal touch per se.
Right.
So what were some of your challenges, I guess? So actually, let me go back. So you finished the PhD. Like, what was your ultimate goal of getting that degree? Because you were like me, that you love to learn. I mean, I went back in my 30s and got my master's in business while I was still teaching tennis. And then I flipped over I had a couple of things happen in my life, and I actually started right after the MBA. I started at MSW, literally like the next semester. And then I got to the end of that. I was at the I was finishing the second to the last semester, and I decided to drop out. And that's when this company was started. So I literally dropped out like one semester shy of getting my master's in social work. And because I just got to the point of like, I don't know if I can actually because you have to get licensed, obviously, in that field,
right.
Or that's the only way you can really do one-on-one therapy. I mean, that was kind of my ultimate goal, and I just didn't see myself working in like a nonprofit or social service mode, at that moment. So I chose a different path completely. But what was your kind of guide to get to that PhD, and what was your ultimate, like, what are we going to do now?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. As I mentioned, I love learning. I love college. I found myself walking across campus during my undergrad going, I don't ever want to leave here. I just want to be a student forever. Of course, I had that thought, I can't be a student forever because I'll run out of money. And I was like, hey, I could be a professor and then I would never have to leave the college campus. And that was my initial thought of going to graduate school, was to become a professor, and then I could just spend my life on the college campus being a professor, which I still think would be a great thing. But then what happened with me, I was in my final year of my PhD, and this is kind of a long story, but I'm going to keep it succinct. I had a 3-year-old boy at the time who was diagnosed with a very rare bone disease. And I found a clinic in West Palm Beach that specialized in his disease, and they were the world's leading expert in his disease. And I was looking for jobs at a university all over the country. So me and my wife decided, hey, why don't we just go to West Palm Beach? That way we have the best care for him. So as I'm looking at universities down here, I would also pop on the website of this clinic and just kind of browse around, because I was thinking maybe I could collaborate with them and do research with them. Well, I ended up finding a job with them, doing clinical research, studying the medication that was being developed for my child's disease.
Wow.
Which was one of those things like synchronicity of the universe, right? Like you couldn't plan that. And so I moved to South Florida, which took me out of the plan to go into academia and be a professor, and put me into a orthopedic surgery clinic studying this disease and some other orthopedic diseases, which was really rewarding and really great. To wrap up the story with my son's disease, it actually turns out that his disease, he was misdiagnosed even for a couple years with this world's leading clinic. And we did some genetic testing and found out that it's a different disease, and I actually gave it to him. So I also have it.
Oh, wow.
And the good news is the disease that he actually has is a lot less severe. I've lived with it my whole life. I have a couple family members that also have it. We didn't know it until we did all this genetic testing. But it's something where he grows benign tumors off the bones, but they recede, where in the original disease they don't, and kids go through surgery. I mean, I saw 2-3-year-olds going in for massive surgeries for this disease.
Wow. With
my kid's disease, he's 9 now. He hasn't had to have anything. As I said, I've had it my whole life, didn't even know. Now that I know, it explains a few things.
Right.
But I lived with it. My family's lived with it. So it's a much better prognosis in the end.
Right.
So I worked there for a couple of years. And then what happened is when COVID happened, it basically killed the research project. We had just had to put our patients on hold on the medication because of an FDA hold, because they were looking at some adverse effects. Right after we put them on hold, COVID happened, and they basically said, there's no way we're going to be able to get these kids back on medication anytime soon, so we're going to pull the plug on the whole study. So unfortunately, that study tanked, and that was what was paying me.
Yeah.
Although the clinic did keep me on for a little while as a scientific researcher, but I just wasn't happy in that role. And it's kind of weird, because at first, when I was doing the research study, it was kind of below my pay grade. Not that I really believe in things being below my pay grade, but you didn't need a PhD to do clinical research. You can do that with a bachelor's degree. They prefer a master's, but you don't need a PhD. Then when I was being a research scientist, it was more of writing the publications and doing what a PhD should do. But I just wasn't happy in the situation and in the work environment. And that's when I decided to step out and start South Florida Fitness and go into the training aspect and work for myself.
Okay. No, that's great. And I think you can still go back and teach part-time if you wanted to. I mean,
Yes.
I've been looking at that
Yeah.
myself, of applying to like Palm Beach State more in the lines of, entrepreneurial studies or something, because with the master's I can do it. I don't even need the PhD to do that.
Yep.
Obviously they still
Yeah, and that's something I always keep my options
Yeah.
open, keep my ears and eyes open for situations like that, because I do love teaching. I love working with students, and so that's something that I will be doing
At some
throughout
point.
my life, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I think it's good because then you can impact from the learning side plus the direct, impact side where they're learning too, but
Right.
they're also getting the benefits of what you're teaching them as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's one of the things about teaching is I feel like you're having impact on all these people that then go out and have an impact on their people. And so it's almost like this, this exponential effect that you can have. And it's one of the things that draws me to it.
yeah, and I think, but having the side where you are actually out in the field can even make a bigger impact, because that's one of the things when
Yep.
I went through the MBA, and I didn't really think of it at the time, but now that I own a business, I think of it, because I'm like, I wonder how many of those professors actually have ever done anything in the business world, yet they're teaching,
Right.
a course on finance or marketing or whatever. And, but they're PhDs, and a lot of them have been teaching for years and years and years at university levels. So I've always thought that kind of after the fact. Now I think maybe I wasn't in entrepreneurial studies. I was in MBA with a focus on sports management. So I was
Right.
in that program. So they did bring in people actually in the field for the sports management specific classes. So they did bring
Okay.
people in from, like, there was someone that taught a class from, was it Wynn University? And I had to intern the entire time in different
nice.
sports situations. So that was great from that side. But I'm always thinking about those core classes of MBA, of whether they actually, any of them have actually owned a business, So,
Right. Yeah. And there's sometimes a gap between what professors are teaching and them having the practical knowledge versus are they regurgitating what they learned when they were a student?
Right, or what the
Or did they
textbook
actually
is
go do
saying,
that?
because you're like running out of a marketing textbook, and the marketing textbook is 2 or 3 years behind, and
Right.
from when it was actually published, so
Yeah. And, with sports and stuff, we really see it a lot where coaches are typically ahead of the research.
yeah,
Because what happens is research takes several years to catch up and to prove things, because you have to do studies multiple times
Right.
to really say that this happens. Well, coaches try it, they see that it works, and they keep doing it. And then eventually the science catches up and says, "Oh, you're right."
it does it.
Not that every coach is right with everything
No.
they do, but in general, the practical side of things has their finger on the pulse.
Right,
Research always lags behind, 5 years or so, and sometimes even longer, depending on the complexity. Because sometimes it's hard to study certain things, but coaches just know.
yeah,
And same thing with, in business, there's the people that are running businesses that are out there marketing their own businesses know more about marketing than the people that are studying it from a textbook.
right, absolutely. So when you started South Florida Fitness, what was the idea behind it? What was your target market? How are you planning to help people?
Yeah, when I first started, I was still at the hospital, and I thought that I would just do it kind of as a side thing because I really liked working with people. It's actually kind of funny. In my undergrad, I did personal training, CrossFit coaching. I put on 5K, 10K races, and that was my main source of income. And now I have a PhD, and I'm personal training, putting on triathlons, and I'm doing a lot of the same things that I did. But I enjoyed that when I was in my undergrad. And so I started it as, I'm going to do this just part time. And so I wanted kind of a side thing just to do something that I enjoy.
Right.
And I like to help people, find their passion for health and fitness. And so that's why when I started it, and then when I was unhappy with my work environment in the hospital, was when I just kind of said, well, maybe I should just make the leap and go full time into the business side of things. And so then I made that leap and just started doing it full time.
Okay, no, that's awesome. And what have been some of your greatest challenges once you started the business and you jumped in full time?
There's a lot of challenges, as anyone who's run a business knows. Probably the biggest challenge was not knowing what to expect and not knowing really anything. I'd never run a business before. My only business knowledge was from things I'd read, studied. I took a couple business classes, but I had never actually run a business before. And so my biggest challenge was that people weren't knocking down my door to come train with me. And that
They didn't just magically know you were there.
right. It was like, yeah, you incorporate a company and make a website and they should just be at your doorstep, right? So that was probably my biggest challenge, was learning how to market myself and learning how to get back up and keep trying things. I had several different avenues that I've attempted, and I'm still doing this. I mean, I still launch things and they don't go anywhere, and I just redo it and come up with the next idea. You got to know when to stop beating a dead horse and go get a new one. So that was probably one of my bigger challenges, was not knowing what to expect, and then not having that expectation of things working out like you'd planned. And then the one other thing that I would say has been really challenging, and it's still challenging, is when you put a lot of time into something, it's hard to let it go.
Right.
But there's that whole sunken cost fallacy, and that's all it is I've invested all this time, but if I keep investing time, I'm just losing more time if it's not going anywhere. That time's not coming back that I already invested.
Right.
So it's not like I'm going to make that up. But it's hard to put time into something and then just let it go and be like, well, that was, hundreds of hours. You feel like it was completely wasted. Although I've learned, as long as you learn from those situations, then it's not wasted. It just didn't maybe pan out financially the way you were hoping.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a lot of what entrepreneurship is. It's the, ups and downs of some things stick. And obviously, the more you're in business, the longer you're in business, I shouldn't say the easier, that's probably not the right terminology, but kind of the direction you need to go. That doesn't mean you're still not going to hit roadblocks or something. The economy changes, this pandemic hits, which we couldn't have predicted. All those types of things come up. But it's, as an entrepreneur, it's much easier for us to shift a direction versus, a major company shifting a direction quickly.
And I think once you understand that and you've been through it, what happens is you learn to expect the unexpected.
Right.
So it becomes like, okay, I do need to cut my losses and turn. Oh, that didn't work out. This situation happened. Let's try this. And that becomes more of the norm than something that you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Because this didn't work out.
Right. And I think the key thing you said was the learning piece of always being open to learning from things that don't work out, because that's the gift behind the failure, I guess, for lack of a better word, is you can still take something away from it. Maybe you learned how to do something that will help with the next thing that you launch, or whatever it is. You can still take different things away from that, or maybe it just wasn't the right time, and you could bring it back out again in 2 years or something like that, and it is the right time, because sometimes it's a timing piece too. It's not always, hey, this isn't going to work. Maybe it's just the timing of when you launched it isn't going to work.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, we're scared of failure. None of us want to fail, but we can learn from it, and we learn so much. And if we can just avoid the catastrophic failures and just make sure and keep getting back up and learning from our failures. And I like the analogy of learning to walk. I had a professor in grad school that he would say, we're all the Michael Jordans of walking. And what he meant is that we can walk phenomenally well. I mean, the way we go up and down curbs and stairs, and we navigate crowds, and we can essentially trip and recover, we are phenomenal walkers. but none of us started out that way, and we all had to learn to walk. And if you look at kids that are about like a year old, 18 months old, learning to walk, they fall down roughly one time for every 140 steps.
Huh.
And I still have not met anyone that is in a wheelchair because they decided to not walk. People only ride in wheelchairs because they have to,
Right.
not because they gave up and they said, "Oh, walking's not for me. I failed. I guess I'm not meant to be a walker." You know, as kids, obviously, we don't understand failure. We know we need to get moving, and we keep walking. But it's the same thing with us as we try, different marketing strategies, launching new products, services, whatever. If we come into roadblocks and we have a failure, we have to figure that out. Just like the kid walking, they maybe had a realization one time that, oh, when I'm looking around while I walk, I seem to fall more. But if I look in front of me, I don't fall as much.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try looking in front of me. And now they don't fall as much. We can do the same thing as, I tried this and it didn't seem to work. But hey, when I do this, I seem to get a good response. And so then your next marketing campaign, you add more of that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's that A/B testing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And I think, as entrepreneurs, we become more resilient as we go because, so what you were talking about with the kids, kids are resilient, and ultimately they're not going to be stopped because they don't have the tainted view of life that we maybe have from, however you grew up or, different things that have happened throughout your life until you got to this point, which all impacts your current stage of life. So it all impacts whether you know, relationships, your business, all those two different pieces, unless you've worked on yourself and continue to work on yourself to improve those things. And I think kids, the younger they are, don't have that. So when they're learning to walk, when they're really young, they're just like, well, I fell. Okay. Obviously there's probably not even a thought process to it. They're just like, let me get back up and go again. And, they plop back down again and they go again and until they're finally mastering it, versus us who sometimes overthink it as entrepreneurs versus, hey, you know what, let me just get back up and move to the next thing. And I think as long as there's a strategy behind that, because what you don't want to do as an entrepreneur, and I see this sometimes with clients of mine, is there's the next shiny thing, and they only give this piece a little bit of time to work, and then they're like, oh, well, that didn't work. It's only been a month and no one signed up, or whatever it is, and let me go to the next shiny thing. And that sometimes is a mistake, a different direction. So just like you said, you have to, like, what is it, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, kind of thing, and give
it's true.
Give it ample time, and not be, see the next shiny thing. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things in entrepreneurship, is doing that, of giving it enough time, but not, like you said, too much where you're like, okay, now is it a point of no return type of thing?
Yeah, there's definitely, you have to find that line in between, because you don't want to continue doing something too long that doesn't work, but you also don't want to give up on something too soon because you're thinking it doesn't work, but maybe you just haven't quite hit that breakthrough yet.
Right.
So there's definitely a balancing act there of figuring out what, like you said, when to hold them and when to fold them.
Right, exactly. And I think the more you're in entrepreneurship, the more you can get a feel for that and know what's working and what's not for your particular industry, and make those tweaks. Because sometimes it's just making a little tweak as well, as opposed to shutting it down all the way.
Yep.
So what have been some of your greatest successes in your business to date?
I think because I have a service business, I see my greatest successes as being my clients reaching their goals and improving. I've shifted a little bit. When I first started, I was all about helping the people like find the joy in fitness, or helping those people who had maybe gotten out of it get back into it. And I've shifted a little bit more towards helping people who are already into the fitness and helping them improve more.
Okay.
And that's actually been very rewarding in the sense that I've started working with more people who are already motivated, already kind of, they don't need the encouragement to do it.
Right.
They need the know-how and the direction and just those extra pushes. And that's been really rewarding, is to be able to give people that. And, for me, like, I do a lot of nutrition coaching as a part of my thing. And I'm starting to work with more of the actual endurance athletes as opposed to just like the general public. And for me, I started running marathons and I had no idea about nutrition.
Right.
And I hit the wall at mile 20 because, maybe I'd eaten a gel or two, but I didn't really have a plan.
Right.
And I get calf cramps because I wouldn't drink right. And so to work with people and to help them, on their first marathon, to have a plan and to go in with, something that's going to help them not go through the pitfalls that I went through when I was training. That's been really rewarding. And then also, like, I think just the personal growth that I've experienced through my business has been so rewarding. It's, I've learned so much in the past couple of years, and, we learn so much from doing the hard things, and being in business is pretty much all hard things. There's not too much that's easy. So
yeah, and I think
you get the opportunity to learn a lot.
absolutely. And I think when you get the stronger foundation, so you talked about how you came in, you'd never done anything in business, you didn't know how to run a business, you didn't, and I think that's a lot of what I see in clients, that when they first start, they're doing everything. You're the website designer, you're the salesperson, you're the marketer, you're the service provider, you're the accountant, you're doing kind of everything. Versus when you worked for someone, if you worked for a gym today, not that they would hand you clients, because usually they don't, but they would still give you the
But they would
equipment.
accept the payments. They would pay me out.
Exactly. So they would do pieces of it. You may still have to market yourself and get the clients.
Yeah.
They might give you some of them, depending on the gym, but they would provide the equipment, all that type of thing, versus, if you're going to set up your own personal fitness business, and you got to be like, okay, do I need equipment? Do I need, what am I doing to market it? What are my programs? I mean, all those pieces that aren't just readily there. And that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, that's why I'm so passionate working with people that want to start a business or that are newer in business, because really trying to create that foundation so you can basically implement your personal and business goals together. Because that's probably one of the largest pitfalls, is people go all in on the business, and then they don't see their family or friends for for days on end, because they're like, oh, I got to work longer hours, and I got to figure out how to do this, and you're doing all these things that maybe you've never done before, and until you get the income to hire certain things out that maybe you're not the best served person to do. And that can take some time, especially when you're starting a business, unless you have a lot of capital to start it.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the big challenges, and it still is that I'm still doing everything in my business. So I haven't hired anyone out yet, and I'm hoping that it won't be too long before I can start doing that. But that has definitely been like, okay, now I'm the accountant, and I'm the I'm the inventory purchaser. I have to do all the equipment. I still currently do the lawn service because I have a backyard gym, and so it's like
You're the lawn service, huh, to the gym.
That's actually my first. I'm getting ready to start bringing someone in to keep the lawn looking good, because I spend more time than I should making sure the lawn looks good enough, because I have clients in my backyard.
Right.
And that's one of those that I look at what it would cost me to have someone do it versus the hours I do it, and I know that's a no-brainer. I got to do that.
Well, yeah, and what you could be paid from actually working with another client, instead of spending that time cutting the lawn and making sure there's no weeds or whatever else that you need to do. Absolutely, and I think that's what.
Yeah, and you gotta look at your time, like, what is my time worth?
Exactly.
And I shouldn't be doing jobs that are below my pay grade in that sense.
Yeah.
At first you do have to, and until you get to a certain point, you do have to take on that stuff. But at some point, I'm not going to be doing the finances either. I'm going to be handing those over. And I mean, but it's good to know that stuff, in the sense that I can always keep an eye on them. So you hear those stories about people who, especially when you have people who come into money really quick and they hire their brother's friend to do their books and he embezzles from them.
Yep.
And because I've started from the ground up, I'm going to know all pieces of my business. I'm going to be able to talk to my marketing person when I have one and give them feedback and understand what they're going through and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, and I think that is critical because you want to know and make sure you understand. I mean, I don't fully understand the tax return that gets filed for my company. I mean, I've always hired that out because I'm a S Corp, and that's a whole different tax return versus an LLC that comes as a pass-through to your personal. But I have chosen not to ever touch that return, even though I've done my personal returns before. I don't currently do them, but, I trust that my accountant knows what he's doing. And the S Corp, I was glancing at it this morning because the extension is due tomorrow. So he had sent it to me, I think over the weekend or something, because he had filed an extension. And so he sent it to me when I was out of town, and I was finally getting to look at it, and I was like, yeah, I guess it looks right. And one number looked off, and I went and looked at my books because I still do my books. So I know what my numbers are, but I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
And that's the type of thing, like, enough that you're able to catch red flags and see things like that, but you don't have to micromanage it.
Well,
you can let your accountant take care of it. And
and so I think that is it. You have to, as you grow the business, figure out what's the next thing I need to, that's not either I don't like to do, or, and you said like prioritizing those, it's below my pay grade type of thing, but also sometimes you're not the best person to do it from the standpoint that you don't enjoy doing it. It's a headache. It's, so what's that next priority? Like, I don't dislike doing my books. Now my problem is I wait until sometimes the end of the year or the beginning of the next year to like cram them all in at once. Doing better this year. I'm halfway through my year, so I'm doing better this year, but at some point I will farm that out. That's probably the last piece of my control that I have from that standpoint. I mean, we do manage all our own websites, but I have either myself can do it or someone else in my team can do it as well. But, that's the more the planning and like, what's that next piece? Is it the tax return? Is it the books? Is it the marketing? Do I hire a salesperson? All those different pieces.
I think that's kind of, in my opinion, that is my end goal, is to be able to focus on what I'm passionate about. So there's certain things that I'm not going to be as good at, but then there's also things I just don't like.
Right.
I may be good at them, but I just don't enjoy doing them. And so if I'm doing them, I'm not going to be bringing that passion to my business, and that's going to, in the long run, hurt my business. So my end goal is to be able to spend my whole day doing things that bring me joy, I'm passionate about, that serve my business, and everything else to have other people. And people have passions there's people that have passions for the books, you know what I mean? Like, and I know because I'm weird. I like a lot of weird things. Like, there are certain things on computers that I just love, and so I actually really enjoy doing graphic design. Is it worth my time in the long run? Probably not, but it's also something that I can sit with like Adobe Illustrator or PowerPoint and create graphics, and I'm satisfied with that. It brings me joy to do that. It may not always be the best use of my time, in the long run, but as long as I'm passionate and happy, then I think that's going to elevate the business.
Right. Exactly. No, I agree. I think the more you can that's why I never did the tax return for the S Corp. Because I was like, every time I have to do my own, which once I start doing it, I would be fine. And I had done it for years and then handed it off one year to somebody and they screwed it up. I was like, okay, let me pull it back to me. So now I just hand them both off to my accountant and I'm like, here you go. And, fingers crossed, everything's good. But yeah, I agree with you that I never wanted to learn the S Corp tax return because, the personal one was, not that it was hard enough, but I mean, it was, you had to keep up on certain things. And I mean, my things aren't too tough, but you had to keep up on enough so you knew how to do it. And then I'd ask an accountant a question about it. And I might get the right answer, might get the wrong, not my current accountant, but a different one. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, let me just hand it off to somebody I trust to do everything.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you only do it once a year, so you have to relearn it every year when you're going back to it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're using like TurboTax, you're like, what's this question mean?
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's not definitely not worth my time and my energy to do it. Never has been. I'm like, that I'm willing to pay for. I'll figure out where the money's coming from and like how to pay it out. But so when you were growing up, did you ever see yourself as a business owner?
I hadn't really thought about that, but no. I actually, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a garbage man and play in a band. Those were my two things. And if we had to pick up garbage and have a concert on the same day, they were going to have to find someone else for the concert because I was definitely riding on the back of the truck and throwing garbage bags.
That is too funny. The funny thing is, I think my parents told me some story that I don't know, someone asked me one time and I don't even know how old I was, and I said I wanted to do that, to be like do the trash truck thing, and I was like,
Right.
Really, how old was I, when I said that? But
yeah, and for me, I know it was just seeing the guys riding on the
that
back.
was probably me too.
It looked like a blast, But no, I had a lot of different things I wanted to do growing up. I've always been somewhat of an entertainer, I guess you could say. I've juggled, I've played music. I used to love doing like the school concerts and stuff. I kind of saw myself maybe going that direction. And then when I was really young, I actually was really into numbers and accounting, and like I thought I was going to be an accountant. And my mom started a business when I was like 11. From when I was like 11 to 13, she started a business, incorporated it, sold it. And so over a couple year period, I saw her run a business. And that was the first time I really thought about like, oh, hey, this is something I could do.
Right.
I mean, I was still pretty young then, but that kind of maybe put that in my head that that's always a possibility, is to have your own business. So I'd say kind of through my teenage years, the thought was there, but it wasn't anything I was pursuing.
Right. And I think sometimes it just happens. And maybe we want something more out of life at the time. Like you said, you got tired or didn't have really any passion for the job you were doing. So either you need to get a different job, or you need to go out on your own, and you were already doing some of it on the side. So just expand the hours of what you're doing would work. But I think that's the same with me. I mean, I got to the point where I went back to tennis after I got my MBA, and I had done my MBA full time, so I was working part time in tennis at the time just to cover some of the bills and whatnot, because I had to intern and do all these things with the MBA. But I did that, and then I went back to tennis because that's when I went into the MSW. And the MSW I was doing part time, so it was like a 3 or 4 year thing.
Yeah.
So I was doing that part time, so I loved to still learn and did all that. And then after that, I decided at one point, I was like, okay, I need to like figure out what it is I want to do. And I think I'd gone to, and I don't even remember how I got there. I had gone to like a women's networking event. So I was still working in tennis at the time, and I had gone to do this, and I don't even know what prompted me to go do that, to be honest. I don't even remember what prompted me. And there were a lot of women that were business owners, and I don't know where they were in their business. I mean, I know the people that ran the networking event. I kind of know where they were in their business, but a lot of the other ones, I don't know exactly kind of where they were in their life cycle of their business. But it prompted me. That was the first time I'd been in like a group of women specifically that were business owners, and that got me more thinking. And it was all positive, and anyone can do it, and all that type of mindset. So that was my first foray into it, and how I moved from there eventually to start this company with a business partner, and then it's been a journey for the last 10 years after that.
By the time I went back to college, I was pretty sure I was going to start a business, and I was going to go for business. And then I had the whole become a professor so I can, never leave college idea. And that's what prompted me into grad school. But my original plan was to start a business, but I wasn't planning on anything like what I'm doing now. I was going to start just more of a, like store, or just kind of a more brick and mortar or a mail order, some type of just more like not a service business
Right.
like I do now.
Mm-hmm. So switching gears briefly, I know you and I met,
Yep.
and I mentioned it at the beginning of our interview, in Toastmasters. And I know you and I
Yeah.
came in about the same time in our group. I think it's been close to 2 years now.
Just over 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you're currently president. I'm treasurer. And what prompted you to join Toastmasters? Because I think that's, for me, it's an important piece, because I had wanted to speak more and improve that skill. I don't think I ever would have done a video podcast had I not started that, because I was doing some audio stuff before, but I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going on video. I don't want to see myself on video. I don't want to be on video, none of that. And even though I have a video production studio in Delray, I was like, no, I don't need to be on video. I can sell that service, but not be on it. And that's been critical for my personal growth and also business growth. So what prompted you to jump into Toastmasters?
Yeah, I was coaching actually right next to where your studio is at. I was coaching down at the soccer field there. And I was coaching this guy who was actually a sports psychologist, and he travels around the country speaking to sports teams. And this was the first time that I had met him. It was a group fitness class, and it was the first time that I had met him. And we talked off and on throughout the hour class. And at one point, towards the end of the class, he said, "Can I tell you something?" And I was like, "Sure, what?" And he's like, you talk very negatively about yourself. And I was kind of taken aback, because I've always had a very healthy self-esteem, I guess you could say. I never realized that I talked negatively about myself. And it really made me think. And, when he had mentioned that he went around and, did these speeches to people, I remember specifically that I said to him, yeah, I always thought it would be cool to be a public speaker. And then I was like, yeah, but I don't really see myself as a public speaker. And I made that comment, but I also thought about our conversations throughout that hour-long class, and I had made several comments to that effect, because he kept asking me, what do you do? What's your, what do you, blah, 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 asking me all these questions. And I realized that a lot of my responses were talking negatively about myself, even though I didn't feel like I felt that way. But I apparently did, because I would say, I don't really see myself as a public speaker. And it was that comment specifically that made me say, I can be a public speaker if I want. There's no reason I can't be. And I just searched for Toastmasters because I'd heard of them before. I was like, I'm going to join a Toastmasters group, and I'm just going to start talking. And it's 2 years later, and I haven't shut up. So it's worked out great for me. And, I feel like I can do public speaking. It's no problem. And I spoke in front of classrooms all the time. I mean, my 8 years of grad school, I was a teaching assistant, and I taught classes as a professor on record for several years as a PhD student. So it wasn't like I couldn't talk to people in front of people, but I didn't envision myself as a public speaker.
Right.
Where now, even though I don't have any like actual public speaking engagements I'm getting paid for, I still feel like I am a public speaker. I speak primarily at Toastmasters because that's my outlet that I've been using. But, I have that ability to just talk and share my story, and I've learned so much from that, and it's been so rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's key because it gives you that outlet to talk as much as you want. I mean, especially our group. I've heard some groups are a little bit more, not competitive, but like competitive in getting the speaking slots.
Right.
As far as speeches go, but ours doesn't seem to be that, especially if you're more thinking in advance of when you want to speak next, and you schedule yourself out 2 or 3 weeks, which I see you do, and I think I do too. So, that's usually not a problem in our group. And so I think it has given me that outlet too, where I've learned to be more confident in doing it, which is also what helped me launch this in the video mode, because I was doing video in my studio initially versus this online because I wanted control over everything. So I wanted to control over the sound and the lighting and there was no Wi-Fi needed because sometimes Wi-Fi is an issue on this online thing. There was none of that. So I wanted control, and in person's a whole different ballgame. I remember when my first interview was, I had like a notebook in front of me of like questions because I was like, oh, what if I get stuck? I had this like notebook that I had put on my lap in front of me, and I'd have like, not a ton of questions, maybe 5 or 6. So if I couldn't think of something to say, because I didn't want to do it as, here's your 5 questions, and this is what I'm going to go over.
Right.
There's always a place I start and there's a place I end, but I wanted it to be a little more organic depending on the person coming through.
Yeah.
And I found that maybe I looked at that sheet once or maybe twice during it
was like a safety blanket that you had, but then you found out you didn't need it.
Yeah, exactly. So I probably used it for the first maybe 6 or 8 times I did the interviews in this office, and now I don't really use it at all. I mean, I don't have any questions lined up on the side or anything like that, and I've really only had maybe 1 or 2 people where I've had not challenges, but where I felt myself, and you wouldn't be able to tell it from the video itself, but more of that I could feel that, not that I wasn't prepared, but the person's answers were so good that they answered almost the next question I would have asked, type of thing. So, but otherwise, go ahead.
That's something I've seen with my speaking since joining Toastmasters also is, when I first started, we were on Zoom only, and I would have, bullet points next to my computer when I was giving speeches. And then we went to hybrid, and I started going in person all the time. And once we started in person, I never had notes with me at all.
Wow.
And so all my speeches were memorized, but then also a little bit more ad-libbed because of that. And I've developed a confidence and comfortableness with speaking without being so prepared necessarily. Mm-hmm. I want to have an idea of where I'm going. The one speech I had bullet points with was when I did my difficult audience speech, and I was bombarded with difficulty because I knew people were going to be interrupting me. And so I had bullet points that time. But outside of that, when I speak now, I speak. I mean, I know my topic. I know what I'm speaking about.
Right.
And I think it comes across better that way, and it feels better to be more natural like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So where do you see your next steps in the world of entrepreneurship right now?
That's a good question. I want to continue down the path of the nutrition coaching is where I'm trying to put a lot of my efforts right now, but I want to develop it to where I am able to bring other coaches in, and I can take more of a hands-off role from the coaching aspect. Being in a service industry, it's become very apparent that I get paid for my time, and therefore I have a ceiling.
Yep.
I only have so much time. I have 2 young kids. I have, stuff I'm doing. So I have a ceiling of that. And so I need to expand by bringing other people in. Obviously the yard person's one of them, but beyond that, I need to have coaches that can coach for me. And then I just have a small percentage for keeping the books and taking the payments and things like that. So I really want to expand in that area. And that's a really nice area because it's essentially online for the most part. I do have some in-person clients just because they live close, but I don't market just to my area. Mm-hmm. And I also, another piece of my business is I contract out race events. So I work with someone. I've actually worked kind of in their business, but it's a good chunk of my business, and I help set up triathlons. So we have 12 to 14 events per year. And it's primarily, I work somewhat in town preparing for the events. And then on the weekend, we drive down, we set everything up, we run the event, and then we drive back. And so I have these, 12 to 14 weekends a year that I do these events. And I'm hoping to grow in that role a little bit more.
Okay.
So the person that I'm working with doing that is hoping to step back from their involvement in it and kind of let me take over some of that to where I'll be more like the race director of those events. And so I'm hoping to kind of expand in that area a little bit and then possibly add on some of my own events outside of their business, but do some of my own stuff.
Okay. Well, sounds like you have a plan.
Yes.
Now to implement, which is always
exactly.
the fun of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. And that being said, that could all completely go off course and change in the next 6 months. So.
Yeah. When the next thing comes, I'm like, oh, I could do that.
Yeah.
That's the fast pass right over here.
And again, we got to avoid the shiny object.
Yeah, exactly.
But...
Yeah. So as we start to wind down, I ask the same question to all of my interviewees. If you were to give one tip to someone that wanted to start a business or that was newer in business that has helped you grow your business, and maybe you knew it going into business, maybe you didn't know it and you've learned it through your business, what would that one tip be?
I think my best advice for anyone going into business would be to, whatever that thing is that you really don't want to do and you're putting off, that's the thing that you need to work on now. Because it's those things that are holding you back, is by putting those things off and not doing them. And we all do it.
Yeah.
We're all guilty of it because we like to do what we like to do and we don't like to do. But those are going to be your roadblocks. And so if you identify those and then tackle them, you're going to just jump forward a lot faster.
Yeah, and usually those are the more important things that we don't want to do, or we do them eventually. But if we'd done them earlier, then the impact would have been greater, like you said, than holding.
Yeah.
So it's prioritizing the important over maybe the urgent, because sometimes things come in and they look urgent, but they're not necessarily as important as these.
Yeah.
So great. Thank you very much, Troy. I appreciate you joining me today.
Yep. You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It was great talking.
Yeah. And if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, learn more about your services, because I assume you work with people all over the country as opposed to just South Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I know I named my business South Florida Fitness, but I do do a lot of work online, especially with the nutrition coaching. So I am available to work with people essentially anywhere. My website is southfloridafitnessllc.com. And then my email is troy@southfloridafitnessllc.com.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for coming to listening to the Dream Plan Start Grow show. Again, I love working with new business owners or someone that wants to start a business. So if you have any questions for me, please go to my website at theallisonturner.com. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Dream Plan Start Grow podcast with Allison Turner. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Join our community by joining the Dream Plan Start Grow Facebook group, or for more resources, go to my website, theallisonturner.com.